Welcome, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Crafting a Business podcast. I'm very excited to have Miss Fiona here with us today. She's from a company called Chocolate on Purpose, and I'm really, really excited about chatting to Fiona. So welcome.
You're the Moran. That's G'day in my the Wiradjuri language of my old people. It's lovely to be with you today, Debbie. Thanks for inviting me.
You're so welcome. Tell me about first things first. How do you say that welcome again?
You're the Moran.
You do
Good
Moran. Is that
day.
right?
You're a do
Yes.
Marang.
So that's I noticed that. That's in your email signature, isn't it?
Yes.
I did.
So
I did try to reply back once using it, but I was so worried that I would stuff it up. But anyway.
yeah, I think that's us as human beings, isn't it? We just worry so much. I heard somebody speak once, and what they said really impacted me. Like, he's got a very migrant name that many would look at and think, I can't even try that. But the people he loves the most are the ones who stumble all over it, because at least they acknowledged him with an effort. And so I just say, go for it. And then I don't think that you can do too much harm, but just trust that if you did inadvertently do that, that person cares enough that they'll just respond and help to guide. What my signature sign off is a Wiradjuri way of saying, I wish you a day filled with the energy of, respect for yourself, for country, and for others. So thank you for noticing it, Debbie.
No problem. That reminds me, when I was in uni, I did I think a 6 to 8 week abroad study, like a one subject, right? And I went to Europe, which was amazing. And I did like, yeah, as you do when you're in Europe, you go for a weekend off to another country because everything is
Yes,
so close, right?
yes,
Reminded me that one time I had a friend tell me we were going to France, and I don't speak any French, of
yes,
course, right? And the French, it's not like they don't like outsiders, right? But they actually, if you
yeah,
attempt to speak their language and doesn't matter how bad it is, then they will reciprocate, right? But
yes,
if you
yes,
consistently just speak English, they'll be like, no,
yes,
you don't care. So
yes,
that
yes,
really reminded me of that. And it just goes to show
yes.
that if you just put a little bit of effort to understand and to be a little bit inclusive, it goes a long way.
Yeah, it does. It does. And, like, it's about that other person, not so much ourselves. So
Mm.
don't be worried about, what they think of you, but emphasize what you think of them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And tell me, how did this business start? What's the story before we even get to the chocolate bit?
Yeah,
Tell
yeah.
me about that.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's like the Hollywood actor who says, oh, you say I had overnight fame, but I've been slogging at this for 20 years. So there's always like a journey that leads you to somewhere. And there definitely was one for Chocolate on Purpose. And like, if I reflect, I think that really it's been a lifelong journey. I carried the story of my father and his father before him and his father before him in terms of, the disconnectedness that assimilation policies of the government caused for our Indigenous population. And so, we call that intergenerational trauma. And, it's not something woohoo or like, well, what does that mean? Is that just an excuse to have a moan? It's the behaviors that result from those experiences. And so in my family, we all have our crutches, sorry. Oh my God, how embarrassing.
No,
The
that's okay.
crutches.
I didn't even notice
I
until you
know.
said that, actually. I
This
was
is a
like,
sex
oh,
talk. Sorry about that, Debbie. So we all have our crutches that
bloopers.
help us to cope with our emotional, states. And so, smoking is said to represent the anger. So of course they're all smokers, and then you have your drugs like alcohol, and then stronger drugs. Alcohol is really just to numb your pain, and then you
Mm.
go on to harder drugs. They're just to obliterate. You just can't cope. You don't want to see it anymore. So alcohol was a big issue for the men in my family. And so, like, I witnessed that, and then that came into my life, and I had to make choices that I wouldn't continue those sorts of behaviors. My mother had a serious mental illness. She suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. And so I had all of that stuff going on as well. And I think that, somewhere in that journey, I found my resilient self and a really heightened sense of justice, like, fairness. I saw how people were treated, and it really made me angry. And so without even realizing it, I developed this sense of I wanted things to be right, and I wanted my actions to be purposeful and meaningful. And so, all of that sort of came to a head when I was involved in a traumatic holdup I was the manager of a bank. So I was in the middle of an armed holdup. We were held hostage. And so my life just fell apart after that. And postnatal depression came into it. And so, like, I had a lot of teasing apart to do. And what I found was that I was looking for a way to really heal myself. And I found my first impact on that healing through the use of plant essences. And so once I worked my way through the healing, I wanted to find a way to share that with other people. And I studied aromatic medicine and massage. And so I was a natural practitioner. And what I noticed was that when money got tight, people would stop self-healing. They wouldn't stop self-medicating with alcohol, which was really interesting to see during COVID, but they would stop things that were to do with their self-care. And that really frustrated me because then my ability to continue to work with them would stop. And
Mm.
so I wanted to find a universal way to share that healing. Among the journey, like with studying the plant essences, I then found the Australian native plant essences. And so looking for this universal language and morphing myself as my children grew to be able to spend quality time with them, I did chocolatier training. And it was in a class that a teacher said, we're going to make a native pepperberry and raspberry chocolate. And I suddenly just had this message come to me that that was my universal language because, mountain pepperberry is our native pepper. That was the day the business was born, this concept of bush food chocolate using Australia's native ingredients. I call these messages that drop into my head, like I call them clangers, because they're not just random thoughts. I know they've been universally delivered and they're my ancestors talking to me. So bush food chocolate was born. It wasn't more than a couple of days later that Chocolate on Purpose, the business name, was born. And then I moved forward from there. So that was my journey to starting the business.
I'm getting shivers. Like I love hearing about stories of how these ideas come to be. And that's a real organic is not quite enough. That's not the word that's coming to mind. But like the clangor and it's just, yeah, wow,
Thank
amazing.
you.
Amazing. I love that. So then, and the chocolatier training that you did, was this the bush part of it? Was it just like one part of the entire course, or that's a bit that kind of stood out to you? Like, I want to know more about
Yes,
how the
yes.
incorporation happened. Yeah.
So you really can only do true chocolatier training over in Europe. In Australia, it's very much mixed up with patisserie.
Mm,
So a lot of the training was to do with cakes and beautiful things that we all love to eat. But it wasn't until we got to that component that was true chocolate work. And even then, the beautiful pralines and the filling inside, they never really moved me. It was when we got to the part of just the pure infusion of the flavor into the chocolate and the mention of the plants. And then that's when it just fell together for me. That's how the
mm.
chocolate was going to be the vehicle to carry the message of the native botanicals and so much more.
And hence, that's the background. That's the essence behind the on purpose part of your
Yeah,
identity.
yeah,
Mm,
that's right. Because it was always about more than chocolate. And I used the word purpose in my business name long, long before people even started to consider that it was a word you'd incorporate into business. Because for me, the chocolate would always serve its purpose in being the universal way to tell story.
mm.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It's fascinating. And like, tell me, and it speaks to something a little bit bigger, like because a lot of people I think do not genuinely realize what's in not just chocolate but food and pastries and everything else. They do not realize what is in the actual item, right? So
Yes.
what did you learn about the industry then? And what did you learn about
Yeah.
the industry that wants
Yeah.
to make you do something a little bit different?
Thank you. And, I love that you are talking about it's almost like people looking into their chocolate and seeing the story. And
Mm,
so I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that I'm on Gundungurra land, which is in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. It's beautiful, cool climate, and I can hear the black cockatoos flying outside, which indicates that there's going to be a change in the weather. And so Indigenous people call the black cockatoo a giver of message about weather. And so I always then start looking more closely at what's going on outside in the sky because they're giving me that message that the weather's going to turn, and to acknowledge all of the traditional lands that that yourself and everybody listening is on today. And so those messages in on country and with the black cockatoo, I feel that that's what I'm trying to impart into my chocolate. So when people look at my chocolate, I hope that they hear the message that I'm giving about culture and about the ancient wisdom of our people and also the ingredients that are in the chocolate. And it was part of the desire to do this that really led me to develop the business to what it is today, which is a social enterprise. And I never set out to create a social enterprise, but it was about what you are referring to in terms of what's in your chocolate. So the first thing I became aware of was the plight of the cacao farmer and their communities. So there's modern slavery because it's so hard for them to produce this crop. The sad thing about cacao is that it's actually a commodity that's traded on the futures market. So straight away, they're being affected by men, mostly men who are up in these corporate towers who are influencing the cost of cacao because they're trading it on the market. The farmers have got this barrier before they even start to create their, to grow their trees and to harvest their crop on small parcels of land, with a tree that has a limited lifespan, subsistence wages, because most of the money that is spent on cacao is not going to the farmer, it's going to these corporate people. So, modern slavery in terms of needing to engage family to help them, not paying high wages themselves. They're living on subsistence wages. Their trees have a limited life. Their parcels are small. They don't own their parcels. What I do is I partner with a charity who my chocolate I pay a premium for because it's fair trade certified. It's ethically grown, so it mitigates modern slavery. They work with the community to sending the kids to school, building the water wells and things like that. Then what also do you see in chocolate these days is the palm oil, which is ravaging our planet by, raising rainforests, and the fact that another big market commodity is cocoa butter, loved by the cosmetic industry. If you've had it on your skin, you know how nice it feels. And so they remove most of that from the chocolate and they have a hole. You always have to fill a hole. And so they fill it with saturated oils and fats, which are no good for their trans fatty acids. And then they taste really awful. So they pump lots of sugar in it. And then the cocoa butter is actually the antioxidant that stops it, going rancid. And so they have to put preservatives in. And so I've built my business on supporting cacao farmers through paying a premium for what's called couverture chocolate. It contains all of its cocoa butter and it's fair trade certified, no palm oil, and ethically and responsibly sourced. And then the Indigenous ingredients. The next thing I discovered was that the Australian native and botanical supply chain has been built on the back of Indigenous cultural intellectual property, yet there is less than 2% representation of Indigenous people in those supply chains. That's grossly unfair and not right. And so I source from Indigenous growers wherever I can and advocate for their greater participation, because we really have the right to be the custodial holders of this industry. And also the final sort of nail in the coffin for me in terms of my impact, what it was going to be, was the women. So traditionally, Indigenous women are the holders. They're the matriarchal holders of these plant knowledge systems. We shared it through storytelling. And so of that 2% representation, even fewer are women. And so my big wish now is to ramp up the employment of older Indigenous women, to reintroduce them, because we say that the knowledge that we had before, the assimilation practices and the protectionist policies, it didn't disappear. It went inside because it wasn't safe. And so when we engage in the activities of our ancestors, it triggers a healing response and it causes us to remember, winangana, to remember. And by having the women using the plants, I want to help them to reconnect and to step into leadership in these industries. So that's really what you see and taste in my chocolate.
I love, you know what? I thought it was and maybe this is my naivety in not knowing the space, right? But I thought we were going to have a conversation about ingredients and about, what certain ingredients are good and what certain ingredients are not. And we have had that, but there's so much more that's come out of that. The human story, the supply chain seems too simplistic. Like the impact of it's not just the farmer, but the entire business. I don't even know what the future market is. I think you said the market or extra
The
whatever it is.
futures exchange, yeah.
Yeah, futures exchange. Like there's so much that goes into it, and I love that we're kind of deep diving into your story because all of this goes into your brand identity, your story, your founder story, and your why,
Thanks,
right?
Debbie. I mean, I haven't even started really on the ingredients, have I? Like,
No,
for example,
but I
if I
love
just
that though.
if I talk about one, so I call it the treat that's better for you, because not only because of the cocoa butter story, but because of the native ingredients. So, so many people are so caught up on Amazonian superfoods. Like there's a whole industry out there now on the acai berry,
Mm.
shakes, ice creams, you name it. But we don't need to do that. It's all in our backyard. So, for example, ure, which is Davidson plum. And I don't like to call it Davidson plum because Davidson actually created terrible atrocities against Indigenous people. So I always call it by one of its traditional names, which is Ouray, Ooray. So this plant is like a superfood. It's anti everything, antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial. And what's really super interesting about it is that when people are undergoing chemotherapy, they like to use foods that are going to support their well-being. And so acai berry has been really promoted as a help during chemotherapy. However, there are different chemotherapy drugs, and acai berry is found to be contraindicated with a number of them. But in clinical trials, ure has not been contraindicated in any chemotherapy drug. So if part of your story is a journey with cancer and chemotherapy, then you really should look at ure because it won't contraindicate with any of your drugs, and like it's just full of every goodness that a person would want. So that's another thing that fascinates me about the ingredients that I'm using. There's such a story just within those, and that's why I call them ancient plant knowledge systems.
Okay. I think it's interesting because had I not asked that question, I would not know what ure is. I would not know what are all the benefits of it. So, maybe it is in passing of the knowledge through storytelling, but also people like me that are, just inquisitive and asking the questions to get those stories out,
Yes,
and
yes,
and I think that you kind of mentioned earlier on in the conversation that a lot of the ingredients in your end product is affected by things that are outside of your control, as in like corporate, this future
yes,
thing, and
yes, yes.
like how do you start asking these questions? What are the right questions to ask? Where do you go to find this information? How did you find this information?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I'm
then yeah, tell me about
Sorry,
that.
Debbie. Thank you. So when I talk about the futures market, it might help if I talk currency trading.
Oh,
Grains are traded, so they're called the futures exchange. So if you ever Google futures exchange, it'll show you just how many of the things that are in our life are actually being traded as commodities.
mm,
And pricing is a much higher story than just what happens on the land and in our purses. So in terms of me, it's conversation with elders, it's sitting quietly and listening. And when you're ready to hear information, you'll be cognizant of it.
mm,
Reading my research, yeah, and listening to stories. It's amazing how much can be obtained from stories. I remember reading about an aunt in South Australia who was talking about quandong. So, quandong is a little orange fruit, really tough and leathery. There's not much fruit in between the skin and the seed, the kernel, the seed inside. And quite fascinating. Our ancestors used to dry the fruit like jerky, and they would
mm,
carry it with them. So when they were traveling, when protein was scarce, because everything is seasonal, even the animals that they caught, because the animals had to spend a time in, mating and breeding. And so they would eat this jerky, this quandong, and it would sustain them. So that's how much goodness is in that tough, leathery fruit.
mm,
And then for skin, the benefit is in the kernel inside the seed. And she was talking about how her uncle and the men they'd break open, the women would break open the seed and get the kernel and crush it, and they'd make a paste. And they'd been out all day hunting, protein. And when they came back, they would rub the paste on their sore bits. And she said, and then the next morning I'd wake up and I'd see them all sprinting off into the dark. And it was like that Kwandong just did its miracle overnight, So then, just hearing that and thinking, well, hang on a minute, what's going on there? And looking, and that sort of takes you on that journey of looking further into that and just finding, like what chemicals are the anti-inflammatories. And that's sort of where it ties back into my aromatic studies, because a big part of that study was the aromatic chemistry of the plant. And so then discovering what it is in this kernel of Kwandong that gives it that, muscle food, that anti-inflammatory response. And so that's sort of what informs my knowledge. It's not because I just woke up one day and knew it all. It's being curious, it's listening, it's observing. And that's really what Indigenous culture is all about. That's what our languages are about. Our languages are about location, relationship, action, focus, and the transformation. So we don't just have one word for something like we do in the English language. Now that was a tangent. Sorry.
No, but I love listening to the line that you said. I should have written it down, but the line you said about listening, but then being ready to almost take it in or something. I have to
Oh,
rewind
yeah.
back.
So what we say is, so this is what the elders say. You sit and you listen and you don't speak. You don't speak until you're spoken to, because you might miss the information that you are now ready to hear. That was more that I was referring to, yeah.
And then tell me a little bit about, we can go back to the business now because I want to understand. We've talked about your story, how the business came to be, how the idea came to be, and what you set out to do and your values. What's the future look like for you? Who do you want to work with? What are the
Yes,
clients?
yes.
Yeah, tell me about
Yeah,
that.
I love all of my customers. And, sometimes when you're like a soulpreneur, it's easy to think that nobody can hear you and it's all just white noise out there. When I really know, and then even on social media now, you don't get the interaction you used to get. People are so busy scrolling that, many don't even have the time to like, let alone comment. But what I do notice is that my emails, they do get responses. Every time I send out an email, I'll get at least one person right back and tell me what that email meant to them and what they got from it. And then that's when I really go, oh my gosh, people can see and hear me. And so I love all of my customers. I love that they can hear my message and that and some level they'll receive parts of my message. I'd like to do more work with corporate Australia because that magnifies my voice. Because if they share my chocolate with many, then that's a group of many that I don't have access to and I may never have had access to. So not only do I then have a voice among them, but it leverages things because it's a one to many. So I would really like to do that. And I'm really grateful that the way that my business has evolved, I have lots to offer corporate Australia, female led. That's very important for corporates now. Reconciliation action plans, being Indigenous owned and Supply Nation certified. I've got the credentials that meets their RAP plan in terms of supporting Indigenous business. And, we have corporate social responsibility, which has been around now probably since COVID. It really, really has been strengthened and built upon, where things like modern slavery are very important to companies now to make sure that they don't get lumped into that through a poor supplier choice. So I can offer that assurance. ESG is something that's a term that's being used a lot now. That's corporate environmental social governance. So I'm Supply Nation certified. I'm certified as a social enterprise in Australia with Social Traders. I'm certified globally with People and Planet certification. My chocolate's fair trade, no palm oil, so mitigating climate harm. So I tick all those boxes. And something that I only recently sort of became cognizant of, because, you sort of think, oh, that's too big for something that could be me as a small artisan, is that I actually tick 8 out of the 17 of the UN sustainability goals. I've gone from wanting to contribute to a greater good to actually I am. So, that always sort of takes my breath away, causes me to sort of stop and think, wow.
Mm. And I think that we can get so caught up in the like the growth, and that maybe this is like an entrepreneur thing, because I definitely find it, like you just forget for a
Yes,
second how much you've
yes,
achieved and what you can do
yes,
for others, right? And
yes,
sometimes you get stuck in the I've got to do more, I've got to do more. But
yeah,
hold on a second, let's just, take a pause for a minute, because
yes.
you have done a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, one last question, and then we're going to go into the
Yes.
rapid fire section, which I
Okay.
always love to do with all of my guests. But
Yes.
I want to get to the heart of everything that you do in your business, right? And everything that you've built. What do you want people to feel when they interact with your brand, when they buy your chocolate, when they eat your chocolate? What do you want them to feel? I know that's a bit of a deep question,
Yes.
but tell me about
Yes.
that.
No, I want them to feel that they are included, that they are informed, that they're cared for, and that they're empowered. You know that saying, be the change you want to see in the world? I want them to feel that when they walk with me, they're empowered to actually be
Mm.
able to do that.
Love that. All right, so let's go into the quick rapid fire
Okay.
section. So the
Yes.
idea here is that I want to get the first thing that comes to your head. So don't
Okay.
think too much about it, right?
Okay.
I'm going to say
Yes.
a couple of things and see how we go.
All right.
Okay, so the first one, coffee or tea?
I have to ask, why aren't you asking about chocolate?
I will. I
Um,
will.
no, so for me gosh, it's coffee and tea, depending on what time of day it is.
And which chocolate you're having.
Yeah, that's right. Let's pair it.
Yeah, yeah. Are you a night owl or a morning person?
I'm a bit of a night owl. I seem to get this energy kick at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I am I think I'm that too. But then like when I'm up in the morning and I see the sunrise, I'm like, this is amazing. Why don't I do more?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'll
Right?
get started quickly. Yeah, that's right. I get
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's think about business now. Would you rather be the salesperson, like the person that's going out to find the business, or kind of behind the scenes, like, you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
know you have to
I
be
do. I
both.
know exactly what you mean. And
Yeah.
like if I was going to look at where I light up in the creative process. So, for example, NAIDOC Week is coming, and the theme of that year's NAIDOC Week is announced. And then I just start going off on how can I match a chocolate story to that theme? What chocolate imprint, like molds, can I
Mm.
source that tell that story? So, for an example of that is that I think it was two NAIDOCs ago. It was Keep the Fire Burning. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, how can I do fire with chocolate? I mean, talk about, like kryptonite to chocolate. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden, an email landed in my inbox about a new mold, a chocolate imprint mold that had been introduced. And I thought, oh my gosh, that looks like country. It looked like a topographic map, and it had it looked like it had mountains and rivers. And so
Yeah.
that year I told the story of this chocolate mold, how it represented the fires burning on each of the peaks, and how it represented country, and the fires were sending the messages out to everybody, the theme of that year's. And so that process where the thoughts begin and suddenly something will happen to connect all the dots, I get excited by that, which is probably what you can
Mm.
hear in my voice. So
Mm.
I recognize that all of the other things are very important. My dream would be to have enough money that I could just delegate
Give
those
that to
and be
somebody else.
focused on creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, and be in your zone. Hey, I think that's
Yeah.
the dream of every entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. All right. So now we have a completely chocolate focused section in honor of you. Okay. So rapid fire. Here we go. Milk or
Yeah.
dark?
Oh, milk for me.
Milk for you?
Yeah.
Why? Just the.
I think that I really love that melt in your mouth, creamy, honey, caramelly like texture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love that. Okay. Nuts or no nuts?
nuts.
Nuts. Caramel or nougat?
Oh, something in between.
Both.
Nougat's a bit too chewy for me, especially as you get older. You've got to think about how much a new filling costs. Only joking. Um,
True.
but
Well, that's true.
yeah, I like a bit of texture. So I like a caramel somewhere in the middle, caramelly nougat in the middle.
Favorite childhood chocolate?
Oh, I used to love a good Milky Bar.
Milky
But then
Bar.
what happened was it's related to that story about the cocoa butter. Like
Oh,
white chocolate is pure cocoa butter.
Mm.
And so that's why it was so like milkshakey. And then they
Mm.
take it out, and so all of you got is oils, fats, and plasticness.
Mm.
So yeah, Milky Bar was my favorite.
What's favorite? Okay. Is there a chocolate that you secretly don't like?
Oh,
Bit of a curveball.
yeah, it is. I don't like chocolate where the flavors haven't been infused well.
Mm.
I noticed that some people, like everybody wants to use the native ingredients in their chocolate now,
Mm.
but what they do is like they just put the chocolate with the ingredient. So, for example, I'm thinking about a chocolate I tasted with strawberry gum, and it was like literally taking a bite of chocolate and then sticking a leaf in your mouth. Like there was
Oh,
no infusion.
yeah.
So I like a well blended. I don't like cheap chocolate. I like compound chocolate, and I don't like a chocolate that's not been well thought or well crafted.
Mm. Yeah, okay. There has to be the thinking behind it. Like that pairing has to be on purpose,
Yeah,
right? And
that's right.
not
And it has
just,
to be done well. Has to
yeah,
be,
not
yeah,
just
done
chucked
well.
together. Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Last question. One chocolate you could eat forever.
Well, I could eat my version of a scorched peanut bar forever because it's just got everything I love in it. So the caramel crunch, the peanuts, and the milk chocolate.
Love it. Love it. And that's the perfect ending, I think. Fiona, it was so lovely to have you on. Thank you so much for
Thank
spending your
you.
time and for sharing
Thank
your
you.
story. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for helping to share my story. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
pleasure. Absolute pleasure. If people wanted to find you, where do they contact you? What's your website, socials, all of that? Tell me about that.
Sure. So the website is chocolateonpurpose.com.au, and my socials are easy. They're at chocolate on purpose.
Love it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.